All right. Oh my gosh, Lucy, how
Karen,
are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Crazy as ever. Crazy as always. Yes. I'm totally prepared. I'm like emotionally so fired up for this episode and I feel totally invested but also completely unprepared because we're discussing another amazing book. I am a
Are
book.
we?
Yes. And
What are we discussing?
I already bought you a copy. It's on its way
Did you?
since your birthday is coming up.
Oh my
Yes.
God,
I
that's so
know. And I
exciting.
got you another book too, but I'm not going to tell you what it is.
Oh my God.
Um
I love a surprise.
and I'm diving literally straight in because we could go on about this stuff for like 6 hours, which we probably will. So I'm not even going to beat around the bush. I'm so excited to bring to you today the book by Walter Evans-Wenz, and it's called The Fairy Faith in Celtic Countries.
Ooh, I saw a photo of that. Did you put a photograph up on our Instagram of that book?
I did indeed. Okay, this is I gotta. Oh, hi Tippy, you want to come up? Come on, Tippy Whippy. Tippy's my little cat. She's my lap cat of all 3 cats. She's waiting to come into my lap. So I was noticing, and let me know if you've noticed this too, Lucy, that when I dive into my fairy research, well, at least when we started this podcast, I started with like modern books. Like I wanted books that were the most recently published. Like I want like 2021 published book. Like I want like the latest research and like the most, up-to-date material. And then when I found that I was getting some of those books, I was noticing that the same other books were being referenced over and over and over, namely people like Catherine Briggs. So then I found myself going online and buying all of Catherine Briggs' books up. Not even going to tell you how much I spent on those.
Yeah, I think you've bought more books than me. I was trying to curb my book buying enthusiasm and make it last a little bit longer and not be quite so guilty about I'm laughing because I just spotted in the background, if you're watching on YouTube, that Karen's Maggie dog actually just tried to lift the cat up.
She like bats her with her paw, and Maggie's meanwhile is like 70 pounds, and poor Tippy's like 7. Okay, so anyway,
what was I saying?
Oh, books.
Yeah, so I'm trying not to buy.
Well, I'm gonna buy them all.
I'm trying not to buy just because I know that I do have addictive personality tendencies, and if I let myself go too much, before I know it, I won't be able to. And then all the times that I've told my son off for his compulsive book buying, that I'll just get an "I told you so" back at me. So I'm trying to be a good example.
Well, you can just like stash them. I just have a thing for books. I collect 2 things. I collect unabashedly. One is books, and the other one is vintage perfume bottles. I like cannot get enough of either. But the reason I was bringing that up was so then I bought Catherine Briggs' books, not all of them, but just meaningful ones, of what I was into. And then I noticed and so she published most of her books in the 1970s. And then, hi Maggie. And then I noticed it all in her books and others, and other works was this Fairy Faith in Celtic Countries book kept being referenced over and over and over and over by Catherine. And I'm like, well, what is this book? So then I go on Amazon and I love these publishers who are republishing all of these out of print books. So this one is actually published in 1911.
Wow.
This is like a Bible. So I'm so glad I bought this book. And it was not that, it wasn't much. It was like, it's like a new publication.
You mean you bought me a cheap book for my birthday?
I bought you 2 cheap books for your birthday, Lucy. But I'm just saying, like, one of Catherine Briggs' books I bought was like, was like over $100. So this one was, because it's been newly revamped, it wasn't like one of those out of print crazy expensive ones. So this is such a treasure trove for so many reasons. One of them is that this guy is so cool. First of all, he was like a true anthropologist, and I was an anthropology major, and I really feel like ever since I graduated, and I was obsessed. I mean, I graduated no regrets. Loved every minute. I traveled around the world because of my studies. And then I graduated, and then I had to turn around and go back to school because I'm like, oh shit, that's like not a job. Like, there's no jobs in that. You can't.
Yeah, it's like, a little bit like my history of art degree. There weren't really any jobs in that.
Like, and I was like, Like, I wish my parents had kind of tipped me off on that one, but they didn't. So then I was like,
well, that's good that they didn't, because they allowed you to do the thing that you loved rather than what would get you a good job, which isn't necessarily what you should do at university. I know.
And I was super passionate about it. I mean, super passionate about it. And like literally like spent months in Africa researching, and like I was all about it. So I'm so glad I had that. But ever since that, I haven't had anything to do with it, even though it was like really, truly my passion for 4 full years. And now I find myself coming full circle. And he was an anthropologist, really. And he was studying Celtic, like living, breathing Celtic cultures, but he was really studying the fairy faith. And it brought me back to like the cultural anthropology or anthropologists that I was studying back in college, and just remembering why I wanted to be one so badly, which is that essentially, and to be, you're studying a culture like almost like scientifically. So you really need to practice. And it really set the stage for my own like religious beliefs and like my true like core values as my own personal, with my own personal opinions about all this, which is you really need to like clear your brain and your own opinions. You need to suspend all your own beliefs and values and really truly immerse yourself in this other culture. Like that's how you are an anthropology major. And I loved that whole idea of like, and you can insert yourself into any culture, like, go study the Yanomamas who, in the middle of the South African rainforest, who like, have only met like 100 Westerners in their whole history of their whole culture. And like, just suspend belief and immerse yourself. Right. And like, put yourself in the shoes every single day of these people. And so that's what he did.
I'm guessing that, when he was writing in the early 1900s, there were probably still remnants, because a lot of the fairy belief was still up until the 1800s and the late 1800s. A lot of people still believed it first. So he's getting the first-hand report rather than it's, I think it probably died down for a while. And then if you've been keeping up with our latest podcast obsession of the modern fairy sightings, that if we can't start talking about that, because we'll be talking for the next hour about it.
But it does tie into this directly, and I will bring it full circle to that. It's super relevant.
She was saying in one of the episodes that that there's been a huge resurgence in interest.
Yeah, and I think throughout history, this has happened many times where like going centuries back, where it's either super in vogue to talk about it, or it's like, you do not say one word because you'll be sent to and burned at the stake for saying these things out loud. And then flip flops kind of back and forth. And there was a giant resurgence, during the 1800s, where it became that's where a lot of the literature and the poetry was written. And there was sort of this like romantic, perception.
And if you think about
fairies
art, all the pre-Raphaelite paintings that touch on almost that kind of feeling, that magical fairy forest type romantic vision, and Arthur Rackham's illustrations and all of those kinds of artwork that comes from that period. And it's the same with things like the interest nowadays in witchcraft is huge. If you look on Amazon, there are so many books on witchcraft where that was taboo for a long time.
Yeah, it's exactly like that. And the fairies and the witches really also go hand in hand quite frequently for the same reasons. Kind of, it's like on again, off again, in vogue, like, shunned or shamed or whatever, depending on your whatever time period it happens to be. So his main objective was he said, it's not relevant to study the fairy faith from books. The only true way to study them is to go and talk to everyone who's still living it. So he spent 3 years of his life. And this is what anthropologists today in 2021 still do as they go. And it's like always a minimum of 2 years where you leave your friends and family and you immerse yourself, you into a third world country or in whatever, it doesn't have to be that, but whatever culture or religion that you're studying. studying. So that's what he did. So he ditched, but he did it from a really like scientific, he was going with an open mind, open book, and was really like, I want to talk and collect as many firsthand account stories as I possibly can. So he went to each of the six Celtic countries. So Ireland, Scotland, Isle of Man, Wales, Cornwall, and Brittany. And he went by foot, and he literally walked from cottage to cottage. He went to the most remote regions. In each country, he like met up with the leader of like the Celtic, whoever was studying kind of what he was studying, and he made sure that they spoke the language, and that he was connecting up with people like scholars who were interested in the same thing that he was. So they were kind of aligned on what the goal was and why they were researching these stories. And in Scotland specifically, his guide, he calls them, was like Alexander Carmichael, who was also really famous for his fairy research at the time as well. He comes up in a lot of Catherine Briggs research as well. So it was kind of neat because you can kind of like, first of all, the book is written in a way that it could have been written today. It's like very clearly and plainly written, which I find, first of all, I'm so happy because I don't do well when it's like.
I know I don't do well. I tried to read, I think it was maybe Jane Eyre or something like that. It was an older book.
Hard.
And as much as I really wanted to read it, I just find it such hard going, the language, that I ended up giving up on it.
Yeah,
I'm really ashamed to say.
No, it's a real genuine roadblock. And so I was like, oh God, I was like a little apprehensive when I cracked it. And it's not like that. It's like it was written today. Which I found actually amazing, and I thought that was very highly unusual. To be frank, I'm like, admit my ignorance, but I was like, oh, and I was happy because then I could actually read it, really read it for real. But so I just love his whole going in stance was like, no, I'm looking at this, I'm diving in, and just collecting stories. And then at the end of this research, let's look back, and he analyzed like the I think it's five main schools of thoughts as to basically what are fairies, where do they came from, and are they real? And then he comes up with his own philosophy about fairies, where they came from, and are they real? But
are they?
I know, real? Right? I can't cut to the chase. You're doing to me what I do to you. I know you're doing that.
I want to know if they're
you were just sitting there waiting.
Real. I know they are.
I know they're real.
To lots of modern fairy sighting stories in the last week.
I feel exactly the same way. And the podcast that Lucy is referring to is called the Modern Fairy Sightings. Is that right? It's podcast.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Yeah. I could not more highly recommend it. I binged the whole series. I finally finished it this morning. It was amazing.
I binged it as well. It's
so excellent. So yeah, but I wanted to hear, because he's like, first of all, I bought the book for the stories, but I ended up buying into the things he was saying in the book because his research was like exhaustive. And I mean, it was even though it was written over 100 years ago, again, I felt like it was written yesterday. Just everything he was saying made 100% sense. But then he also he really pulls apart like every last kind of objection and school of thought, and brings in every aspect of scientific thought that they had available to them at the time. And he just does an exhaustive research and hypothesis, and then the conclusion he saves to like the very, very, very bitter end. I mean, I was like on the edge of my seat, like reading these testimonies and through this book. It was ridiculous.
That must have been torture for you, not getting the.
It was not getting the answer.
Not getting the answer at the beginning.
This could honestly be like a 6-part series. I got so much out of this amazing, amazing book. I really, really did. But just the testimonials alone are worth it. It's so
some of those testimonials, if he published it in 1911, and let's face it, he could have been doing his research for several years beforehand.
No, he was. It took him 3 full years to collect all those.
So he could have been speaking to people that were around.
Oh yeah,
in the mid 1800s.
Oh no, for sure. He said he like some of his interviews were with men that were like 96 years old.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so they were like, you know, born in the early 1800s. And of course a lot of those heard stories from their parents and their grandparents. So you're really talking about getting like firsthand testimonies of people that were communicating with people who were born in like the 1700s. Like,
oh my God. See, I love that because
I do too.
Nowadays in 2021, I had to think about what year it was for a minute there.
Yeah.
Nowadays in 2021, that time period seems like so far in the past. Like there's nobody alive that I could speak to that has lived through that time period. My granny is dead.
Hold on 1 second. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, so like my granny was 99 when she died, but she was born in 1912. So even speaking to her, I didn't have any firsthand accounts of the early 1800s or anything like that. So everything's just so much more distant for us. But for somebody writing in 1911 that's got experience or has that first-hand account from somebody that's right at the beginning of the 1800s or even as far back as the 1700s, that is just fascinating to me.
I know. And it was just so relevant because he was like, you know, any information about this should be gathered as much as possible firsthand. And I wanted to be like, I know, that's why I brought your book. like, you know, over 100 years later I found like, even now when I go and I'm rereading, she actually in one of Catherine Briggs's books sums up this book as a whole chapter in her book. And after reading his actual book, I'm looking at her synopsis being like, that's weird. That's actually not what I got out of it. Like it just, like she got out different things than I did. And it just went to reinforce like how important, if you are doing real research, how important it is to go to first source, you know, your first hand sources, because that's almost like your raw
on the internet, folks.
Yeah, it's all raw data.
Yeah,
I know.
Don't go to Wikipedia for your first.
And you know what? I didn't for this one. I kept it solely on this one for that very reason. It's like so cool, but it is like reading into the raw data. Like these are the firsthand accounts are so cool. And then it also just makes the books that are published today so watered down because they're just skimming the surface. This is like the guts. Like this book is the guts of that research. Like what?
Oh my God, I can't wait to read it.
I know you're gonna love it. I like could not put it down.
Have you? Sorry, I'm totally going off on a little tangent here, but
that's what we do.
Just thought that our listeners, our multiple millions of listeners might want to hear about the fairy census because that is another interesting source.
It is. We need to put on our website, Lucy. Let's add a page for our books.
Yes,
just list all of our favorite like resources and books. We'll make a new tab, and our website is onescott1not.com. And if you have a story that you would like to share with us, we would love to hear it as well, so you can absolutely share your stories
because we've already used up our two special guests that we had in the sidelines, so we need some more. But that fairy census, so that's online. You can read it online. I think you just type in fairycensus.com and it's a PDF, and it is people have written in with different encounters and stories, and that is fascinating. It's a really good.
It is.
I haven't read all of it yet. I just skimmed some parts of it. So
and the Modern Fairy Sightings podcast is listening version, and she does an amazing job. Shout out to Joe Hickeyhall, which we love her name. I could say it all day. Although I've not been approved to the Facebook group yet. I'm trying to be patient, but I'm stalking my approval status. I hope she doesn't think I fangirled too hard and then was like, denied.
I definitely fangirled.
I just love her, what she does. So I'm going to dive in because there's actually quite a lot to go over.
Okay.
I'm sure you can imagine. So
I can't wait to hear it. And it's so exciting not being the main talker.
It's kind of the best when it's not your turn. You're like, woo.
Just relax and listen to all your hard research and enjoy myself.
I know. And I'm going to butcher. I wrote these notes over the course of 3 days and I haven't actually reviewed them. So just so you know, I haven't seen them since they were written.
Got a D- for effort.
This is the story of my life. It's called Winging It. Okay, here goes. Well, basically, he starts off by saying like, hey, this is actually like a religion, like fairy faith. It's called the fairy faith because it's a religion to the ancient Celts, basically, is what that is. So he says, okay, well, what is the purpose of any religion, right? Which is the same as true as the fairy faith. And it basically is like, just kind of reviews like human beings. And that's why the fairy faith is treated the same as any religion, is that it has the purpose of all religion is that it helps people basically give understanding to their worlds and to things that happen in the natural environment, right? Like volcanoes and hurricanes and like crazy shit they can't explain. So this is true. And this is what
I would also argue that religion, even though it falls short sometimes, also tries to give a bit of a moral code to society, like this is what you shouldn't do and this is how you should behave. And
it tries to make order out of like otherwise chaos. So, and this is people, and this is all religions, past, present, and future. So they believe in these otherworldly happenings and creatures to help them explain, justify, and cope with their own human experiences of the world, its inhabitants, its laws, nature itself, and man's relationship to it, to all of that. So when you think of the fairy faith in terms of that, you're like, okay, yeah, I can see that, right? So
because we've been speaking about that. Yeah, we've been speaking about that quite a lot. You know, kelpies are there to stop you going into water and hurting yourself, and a lot of those things were warnings against children or people not to do things that could cause them harm.
Absolutely. And also things like why people kept disappearing during fishing expeditions on Orkney, right? Oh, it's the Finn men who are capturing, like you come up with reasons for things happening. So
why is my baby not feeding? Oh, it's because it's a fairy changeling.
Exactly. And so then he says, if you think about it, not if you think about it, but this is fact, like ancient ancestors, our ancient ancestors, people way in the back, they had gods, genies, demons. Christianity, of course, has angels and saints and demons and souls of the dead. I mean, there's no religion is exempt from any parts of this. Indigenous tribes have gods, demons, and spirits of their ancestors, right? So the fairy faith in those terms, you're like, oh yeah, look at the fairies are just names for spirits of their dead, right? And can be gods as well. So that was what the Celts was. That was their faith at that time. So you're like, oh no, that makes sense. So then he tries to kind of like interpret the fairy faith. He says, because people have witnessed seeing so many fairies, even though most of the time they recognized that they were invisible, they did think that they had some sort of intelligence. And so his point of view, remember, as an anthropologist, you are adopting the points of view of the people that you're studying. You're like suspending your own beliefs and you're just saying, okay, I'm just going to assume that whatever they say is true. That's what you do until afterwards you then you assess, you assess then objectively what it is that you just learned and experienced from their point of view. And so he was saying, because fairies have a physical form, they can show themselves physically, then they are no longer supernatural and they're actually natural. So they're like part of the landscape and they can be studied that way instead. So, and that's why he was only talking to people who had seen them. so he could collect kind of data based along people who have had firsthand experiences, or people who knew someone and had stories, like that old man who might have been the stories passed along to from their ancestors. So they were trying to really study this from a true scientific perspective and try to like weed out the facts versus things that they call mysticism, which is basically like anything you can't explain is like mystic.
But that's the thing though. That's the thing for me. If there is Mary in her cottage on the Isle of Skye and wee Geordie in his button ben up in the Highlands, and Ailey in her cottage in Orkney. That's you, by the way, because your new Celtic name is Ailey, remember?
Oh, yeah, I was. Yes, I do.
And none of them have come into contact with each other because it's pre-internet days and pre-telephone even. And they all see things that then when that information is collected by a traveling anthropologist, for example, how could that not be real?
I know.
Because
I know. I feel the same way.
I've had this argument with my son and my mother, who both think that I'm doolally.
I had this argument with Sean in a restaurant this weekend.
Yeah.
So I hear you.
And it's like, they say, I think that it's just all stupid fairy tale movie. They kind of almost see it as being this weird,
just leave the door cracked.
Like movie, sort of fantasy. Oh, have you eaten some funny mushrooms kind of thing? Yes. But in my mind, it's the same with ghosts or anything like that. If there will be a certain number of instances where somebody's maybe got an overactive imagination, or they've seen something that they haven't actually seen, or Karen, because I think you're in some of the same fairy themed Facebook groups as me, that people post these photos going, can you see it? Can you see it? And it looks like just a leaf on the ground.
Yes.
Or nothing.
Yes.
But I think that it's worse now because of that, because people can fake photos or fake videos and all of that kind of thing. But if you're speaking about Ailey in her cottage in Orkney and wee Geordie in his button ben in the Highlands in 1850, who have no contact with each other, but they've both seen something that they describe as being a certain way that corresponds with each other, how can that not be true?
I know. Well, and it's like listening to the accounts on the Modern Fairies Sighting podcast.
Exactly.
Like, this is what I was telling Sean. I'm like, you can tell 100% that people are genuinely retelling their story. There was only one of all of her interviews that I was like, I'm not really all in. And I was still like 80% in. And all the other ones, I was like, hands down, that person is not lying. Like you can just tell when people are construing a story and when people are really remembering what happened. Like, you can tell they're not acting, like they are not making this up. And why would you make it up? They even say, like, I've never told anyone this before. Like almost all of them were like, I don't talk about this, because it's like not really cool. But I'm kind of with you. Like, I'm kind of all in. Like, why wouldn't you believe them?
And I was amazed. I know we said we weren't going to speak about that podcast for like the whole of this podcast, but I was amazed at how when they describe what they see, a lot of it corresponds so much to Brian Froud's images.
Honestly. Well, and not only that, Lucy, but
I think he's a fairy. I think he must know something that we don't know.
He lives in Devon, and Devon is like renowned spot for fairy sightings. And I'm like, I swear to God, because his illustrations really are, if you listen to people describe them, they sound like his fairies.
Oh my God, I know.
And not only that, Lucy, but like these firsthand accounts in books like these say they're the same descriptions as the people who are citing them in the 2000s. And it's crazy. It's crazy town. And I cannot get enough.
I know I've said for several episodes, don't fuck with fairies. I don't want to meet one. They can be a little bit evil. And I know that a lot of our episodes, we talk about evil fairy folk doing evil things. But I kid you not, for the last 3 or 4 days, every single walk I've gone through the woods, I am like looking at little banks of trees, willing for something to like move in the distance and like me see this little,
but that photo, in fairness, that photo you sent me, I literally stopped. I was walking my dog and I stopped and like screamed out loud when I saw, granted, I was also listening to that podcast at the same time, but Lucy sent me a picture of this little mound with a tiny cave in it. And it was like 2 glowing eyes. And I was like, what the fuck?
It was 2 like yellow
glowing
yellow
eyes.
flowers
they
that were like poking up, and they just looked like something out of what's that Sesame Street character or something. It was like 2 but it looked like 2 glowing eyes, and I literally stood at this thing for ages going, what is those 2 yellow spots? It looks like somebody's looking out at that cave from me.
Oh my God.
And then I realized it was flowers, and I got a little bit disappointed.
It 100% looked like eyes to me. If you hadn't said anything, if you would have been like, look what I saw my walk, I would have been like, oh my God.
Do you mean I could post that in some of these fairy groups and say, look what's in the cave?
Yep. You could. I really was scared. And then I
zoomed
way in and I saw the stems and I was a little sad actually that it wasn't real.
And the other day when I was people are going to think that I've really lost, like I really haven't lost the plot, folks. I haven't lost the plot. But maybe I already lost it a while ago. But I was walking along the river and I'd been listening to one of the Modern Fairy Sightings podcast episodes where she speaks about smell.
Yeah.
And how you can get a distinctive smell. And I was walking along the riverbank down by my house, and it's exploded in plants at the moment. There's so many wildflowers. It's so beautiful. And it's quite a quiet spot. You don't get a lot of people there. And I suddenly smelt a strange smell.
Oh.
That wasn't unpleasant. It was a perfumey smell.
Okay.
And I got so excited because I was like, that's a sign of fairies. Oh. And I was trying to I couldn't figure out where this smell came from, but I did have like a weird, and it wasn't a smell from any of the flowers. It was just this, and it was only in one spot. Like I moved away from that spot and the smell went, and I moved back to it. Oh. And
was it still there when you went back, or did it go away?
I did a circular walk, so
that's cool.
I'll go back tonight or tomorrow.
Yeah, that's cool.
See if I can smell that smell again.
Maybe
somebody dropped a sweetie in the path, and that's what I was smelling.
I know, right? Somebody with really bad perfume was like just ahead of you on their walk. I know
don't burst my bubble, Karen.
No, I won't. Well, you burst my bubble when you told me the eyes were flowers. I was so super sad.
Let's face it, if there's something staring at you from outside a little cave hollow,
flowers,
would you rather it was glowing eyes, or would you rather it was flowers?
Well, it was happening to you, not me, so I was voting all for the eyes.
You're like, it's okay, I'm safe here in North Carolina.
Yeah,
she's really far away. If she's about to get eaten by like an evil creature, it's fine.
As long as it's not me, I'm fine. Well, you did get me though. You really did. It looked crazy. Oh, that was awesome. All right, I'm diving back in. I'm not gonna let you
sorry. I totally interrupted.
Story. No, it's good. I love it. I love it all day long. So he starts before he starts going through the testimonials, because that's like the main bulk of the book. he talks about the existing theories of the fairy faith, so that he can also kind of plug like his own theory, but because he doesn't give his 2 cents until like the bitter end. It's all research, which is so
excited.
I know, which is so good.
Even though it's my birthday book and I'm gonna get it and be like, I know what happens.
Because you know what? I'm not gonna tell any of the testimonies today. Like it's not even about that. Okay. It's like these big ideas. And that's the like the craziest stories ever. So these are like the trending beliefs at the time for people who have already kind of analyzed this. The first one is called the Naturalistic Theory. And this is basically like all of mankind from the ancient to the present day has always had beliefs in gods and spirits and things like fairies as an attempt to explain or rationalize natural phenomenon, which we kind of already touched upon. It says as they relate to fairies, is that fairies often like anthropomorphically reflect the natural environments and social conditions of the people who hold those beliefs. For example, like Ireland is like rolling green hills and like beautiful landscapes, and their fairies are like very beautiful and like peaceful. They have more like good than bad, and so it kind of like their fairies mirror their environment, which I never thought of.
What does
before.
That say about Scots then?
Well,
we've got all these crazy horrible things.
They're
like
much darker,
drooping boobs and
yeah, they really do. So like of the Scottish Highlands, like they have fierce weather and like moody skies and these crazy craggy bluffs and mountains, and their fairies are a bit moodier and more sinister as well, and which they say like, well, that makes perfect sense because they're just reflecting their natural landscape. And I was like, oh, I guess I could see definitely where that would come from. But then the author Walter says he finds this view very outdated as of about 50 years ago, and it was just way too limited because there was lots of evidence that there is a great possibility that there are invisible intelligence or entities that actually able to influence both man and nature. So it was kind of like, it's not just nature is informing everything fairy, but fairy and these spirits can also influence man and the landscape as well. So because there's like a two-way relationship, it can't just be going one way. So I'm like, I'm in, Walter.
Also, I would also argue that really Ireland doesn't have a vastly, I mean, we're not saying it's like the south of Spain here. It's not vastly
different.
More gentle than Scotland.
But it doesn't have Ireland the Highland Mountains in it, does it?
No. Well, no, but
I mean, it still has craggy bluffs, but
it's not like it's Somerset or something.
No, but I do kind of, but I think they're talking more like
the landscape rather than the climate.
Yes. Oh no, 100% landscape.
Okay.
So just interesting. But he said that's very 1850s of them anyway.
So. Oh, it's so 1850s.
So 1850s.
Oh, so 1850s.
I know. So this other theory is super unusual, which is, and this is the one that Catherine Briggs remarks on the most, which I thought was super weird because to me it sounds super crazy weird, which is there's a Pygmy theory, which means that the fairy belief comes out of an actual of a folk memory of an actual Pygmy race. So
like a bit like Neanderthals, but not Neanderthals, like another race that lived alongside us.
Yeah, and like modern people are are seeing some sort of like a memory from their ancestor, from what their ancestors were.
But why would we still see them?
Like I said, it sounds crazy. Well, I don't know.
And also, sorry, that I'm good with. Can we do what we did with the fairy coffins and just throw that one out the window? Because my other argument with that one would be that not all fairies look the same.
Well, that's part of it. So he has 6 ways where he quickly just proves this. And this is why I thought it was so interesting that Catherine Briggs talks about this one the most, because to me, I'm like, why is she even talking about that one? That one just sounds crazy. But he was like, I just proved this very quickly because there never was a Pygmy race, which you think you could just stop right there.
We'd be finding fossils and stuff like we do with dinosaurs. We'd be finding evidence, like physical, tangible evidence.
I think the evidence was so many sightings of small fairy people. And that's why they're saying, and they're usually sighted around these little mounds and knolls. Like that's the most common sighting. I'm just saying that's where that came from.
I'm pulling a face here for anyone that's not watching.
Don't pull it at me. It's not my hypothesis. But
you would be finding like, just like how when they have done archaeological digs and they have found evidence of Neanderthal people, they would be finding that in places. They'd be finding, I know that there was that strange tiny little 16-inch or whatever figure that was found, the skeleton that was found in South America.
Yes.
That was do you know the one I'm talking about?
No, but I'm just saying,
Well, there was a little miniature skeleton found that was definitely not supposed to be. They did tests on it, and it was supposed to be not a skeleton of a baby or a young child, but like the proportions were more like an adult, and it was tiny. And there's loads of YouTube videos and stuff on this, and I'm sure that I think that maybe even some of it's been debunked as a bit of a con now, but they were saying that was evidence of an alien visitation, an alien being. But you could similarly say that might be evidence of a pygmy type race, but you would find more than one. You'd find more than one. You would find evidence of tiny little houses and tiny little food bowls and
they thought that the mounds were the evidence, like that's but then he was like, but there's also giants and like tiny fairy. I mean, he debunked it for all sorts of reasons.
And kelpies,
and also like fairies are also found all over the world. It's not just in Celtic nations. Do you know what I mean? So that one we threw out. But again, I was just weirded out that Catherine was like, no, I was like, stop talking about the pygmies. I love you. Like, don't go there. The third one was
Catherine, don't disappoint us,
girlfriend. I know you were right on track before the pygmies. The third one was a druid theory, and this one came about the early 1800s, like 1803, where they were saying that fairies are the folk memory of the druids and their magical practices. So they know that the druids is what was the precursor to Christianity, but they also is the same thing where they know it's like at 1911 or even today, like, what came before, but because also the ancient Celts had no written language, they're saying, well, if everything was passed down through oral tradition, these are just, ingrained in our memories. And so these little images. And then he just writes, no, the theory is inadequate. It's largely because, and this cracks me up. So they were saying the proponents of the Druid theory were saying that this persisted well into the mid 1800s because of the fairies were perceived as females. And then the Middle Ages. So the proponents were saying that they were folk memories of the druidesses, which are the female druids. And this is the only thing that I lost a little respect for Walter, because he was like, just know, because the most influential of all were the druids, which were all men. I was like, come on now.
Come on.
So I wrote, of course, assholes, because God forbid there should be like a powerful woman at the time. But anyways, throwing that one out. And then number 4 was the mythological theory, which was that fairies are the diminished figures of the old pagan divinities of the early Celts, which actually Walter was like all about. He said, that's fine, except we still need to explain the belief in gods and goddesses. Like he was like never satisfied. He wanted like the real where, what, and why of these fairies. So his approach, he is calling his research and his findings, he's naming his own theory, which is called the psychological theory, which is like a combination of all of those, like plus like his scientific research into like all of this stuff. So he really is just trying to get to the root of the question, like, why are there fairies? Like, why are there fairies? Not even do they exist, but before he says if they exist, he's like, but why are they there? Which I'm like, you go, dude. Like, but that's a deep ass question.
That's a difficult question, because that's like saying, why are we here? Why are we here? Why are dogs here?
And
he gets here?
that boiled down. Like, he is no joke, which I love.
What's the meaning of life?
I know. 42. And that's what he talks about. Like, what's the purpose? And I'm like, this is good. That's why I'm like at the edge of my seat, because he leaves no leaf unturned. And I'm like, you go, buddy. And that's why he was like, this is such important research. And that's why he spent 3 years like trudging through the mud of Northern Europe trying to get answers, and just talking to person after person after person after, but like, and you know what else I have to say? Walter, he was an amazing writer. Like, is not boring. He has this like prolific, beautiful, like he'll describe like the scenery and the people, and it's also like weaves together like a novel. I'm like, could you be any cooler, buddy? Besides your, stupid man comments.
And yeah, I know listeners are going to say, well, that was of that time, but we don't care.
I know.
It's still annoying.
I know. But his writing really is beautiful. Yeah. And the storytelling that he weaves in, he always sets like the setting and the mood. I mean, let me see if I can find you maybe just one sentence just so you can like hear it. It was so good. I should have. This is where I'm like, crap, if I had just had.
I know, you should have stuck a little sticky label in there, Karen.
I know.
Well prepared.
Right, I just randomly opened the book to a random page. I don't even know what this is going to say. Okay, ready? This is the testimony of a peasant seer in Ireland. The Ben Bulben County in County Sligo is one of the rare places in Ireland where fairies are thought to be visible. And our first witness from there claims to be able to see the fairies or gentry and to talk to them. This mortal so favored lives in the same townland where his fathers have lived during 400 years, directly beneath the shadows of Ben Bulben, on whose side Dermot is said to have been killed while hunting the wild boar. And this famous old mountain, honeycombed with curious grottos ages ago when the sea beat against its perpendicular flanks, is the very place where the gentry have their chief abode. Even on its broad level summit, for it is a high square tableland like a mighty cube of rock set down upon the earth by some god, there are treacherous holds wherein more than one hunter may have been lost forever, penetrating to unknown depths, and by listening one can hear the tides from the ocean 3 or 4 miles away, surging in and out through ancient subterranean channels connected with these holes. In the neighboring mountains, there are long caverns which no man has dared to penetrate to the end. And even dogs, it is said, have been put in them never to emerge or else come out miles away. Come on.
Oh my goodness. Poetry.
Are you serious right now? That was just a random page that I have. I was like, please let this be a good paragraph. I'm reading it. Like, this is a boring one. Oh no. Oh. No, I mean, I really want to have a whole entire episode where I just like retell some of these stories.
Maybe we could do some bonus episodes when we finally set up a Patreon or something where we read from books. And
I know. I really want to. There's so many amazing stories in here, plus his insights. So he divides the book into like each region by region. So he's like, in Ireland here you see these, in Scotland these are the stories, etc., etc. And I have to say that he one of the things that, and we've talked about this a little, we've touched on this a little bit, and I have absolutely no notes on it, so I'm just riffing out of my ass right now.
Go for it.
Is the fact that a lot of the Celts, the modern people that he's talking to there really is a huge overlap between like spirits and fairies. There's a lot of interchange and I think that's like Christianity coming to play and like kind of interlacing and kind of confusing things in a lot of ways. My God. So for a lot of these people, they were like, fairies are ghosts, like ghosts are fairies. Like when people die, they come back as fairy ghosts. And that goes, and so it varies very much from person to person and village to village, but there are people that are like 100% that are like, yes, fairies are ghosts. Like that is what they are. And in other places, they're not intermingled at all. There was a very prevalent, especially in Ireland, which is where Catholicism was probably the strongest too, is that fairies like 100% are fallen angels. So
yeah, I've heard
like
that
they
before.
are taught like black and white. But
I mean, that happens in a lot of culture, a lot of aspects of our culture where things are taken over and appropriated by the church in order to be able to integrate society into the church. So the church came along. Apologies if you follow the church. I'm not blasting the church. I'm just speaking about it historically.
Sure.
So historically, the church came along and wanted to convert that society, that village, into their belief system. And instead of imposing a whole new set of beliefs, which the village would find really difficult to understand, because it would be something completely new and completely different, they would take the belief systems of the people that lived in that society, and they would adapt it so that the people that lived there would end up following the church a lot easier. It was much easier for them to incorporate themselves into the church if certain yearly festivals became Easter, Christmas, if certain fairies or gods or goddesses became angels and saints, they had the same the church might say, and I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but that god that
even like November 1st, which is like All Saints Day, like corresponded with like Samhain. Oh my God, I can't say that. Samhain. Even 16 episodes.
Yeah. Except we had that lost 11 days, remember? The lost 11 days.
That's so weird.
Yes. That actually gives me goosebumps thinking about 11 lost days.
Well, also, yeah. Sorry.
I feel like I'm on the wrong date forever.
You are. It's because you are. You're so screwed.
I mean, half the time I can't remember whether it's a Monday or a Friday or a Wednesday.
I know. Well,
anyway, so it doesn't really make much difference. But
was I going to say too? Well, and even the most helpful folks who came along to help write down the fairy stories of, write down these stories that were being passed on from generation to generation orally. The most major contributors of those were priests. And they, those are their ancestors too. It's not like new people came in and stamped out the Celtic faith. I mean, they were converting fairy believers into becoming believers. So it's, and
also somebody could be telling a story. Let's face it, somebody could be telling a story, and the scribe who belonged to the church, who was the only person who could read and write, could have written whatever the hell he wanted, because they might not have known that, the person telling the story, they could change it and adapt it and make it a little bit more applicable. They'd be like, oh, well, that person said this happened, but actually I'm going to make this happen instead because this is a bit better a story. And
are you saying that happened, or are you saying you think that happened?
I think that definitely happened. Can I tell you a quick sidestep story?
Yeah, yes.
In the 90s, in the late 90s, when I finished university and I was traveling with some friends of mine. I was in a camper van and we were in Prague, and it was not long after Prague had really opened up to the West. So there was still an element of Eastern Bloc country to it. There was still a feel of Eastern Bloc country to it. And we were staying at a campsite, and somebody came into the campsite late at night and stole a bunch of stuff from a bunch of people's tents and camper vans, including mine.
That's awful.
And they stole the keys to my camper van and some other stuff.
Really?
And
that's
long story short, we think it was actually someone who had connections with the campsite owner, because he scoped out who to steal things from. So we asked to get the police involved because I needed a written statement so that I could get new keys. So I had to pay to get a locksmith to change the keys, change the locks on my camper van, because obviously I couldn't have someone going around that could get into.
It's not the super cute one you have right now, right?
No, this is like 25 years ago, Karen.
Just hoping it was probably like long dead and buried. That cute little camper van.
And so the police came along, and it was the most bizarre image that I've seen in a long time before that. We were in this little office, and in came this woman who looked like she'd stepped out of the 1940s with a uniform that looked like it was something from the war, and a little typewriter that she sat on her knee, and a policeman, and neither of them spoke English. And the campsite owner, who quite clearly was in on the thieving scam, but didn't want us to know that he was in on the thieving scam. And we had to tell our account of what happened. And then she typed it in Czech, which I couldn't understand a word of, and then gave it to me to sign, which I couldn't understand a word of.
Right.
And as far as I know, that statement could have said, this girl fallen down drunk and lost the keys down the toilet. It could have said anything. Right. It could have said anything. Because it was like,
and you just
I didn't understand a single word. Didn't understand a single word of it. And so in a way, that's what I mean by the scribes of the church coming along and writing down the stories of the people who then might show this piece of paper to a person who's never learned to read or write in their whole entire life.
True.
And they probably scribed it in Latin as well, so they wouldn't have scribed it in Gaelic.
The only thing, Lucy, is that people give a ton of credit to these priests for writing down the accurate stories.
Okay, so am I being too suspicious then?
I hate to burst your bubble. I was trying to actually give credit to these guys because and especially one in particular, I'm looking over my shoulder because my bookshelf of fairy books is right next to my left. Okay. And there I was actually going to do an episode.
So they had more integrity than
they did. And they
were block policewomen.
Yes. Although I did enjoy your tale because that is some messed up stuff. You missed my point, which was that we like these priests for writing down, because then those stories would have been lost, because those were the real first accounts that happened. Yeah. Way farther earlier than the 1900s. These were like the 1600s or even earlier.
Is there a book of all of those collected together?
That's a really good question. Actually, let me grab this book because there's a little interior sidebar in one of my books. It's called The Lore of Scotland, staring right at me. I'm going to grab it. Okay, so this is from a book called The Lore of Scotland, A Guide to Scottish Legends by Westwood and Kingsall. And there's a little, see how this little, it's like set off?
Oh, yeah. I've got that book. I just haven't read my way through it yet.
So this one is super good, and it says our knowledge of fairy belief in 17th century Scotland would be much poorer had not Robert Kirk, minister of some place I can't pronounce, and then of Aberfoyle.
Try and pronounce it.
Balquhidder.
Balquhidder?
Yes. Yeah. I have no idea. Is that really a place, or did you just?
Sounds like it could be a place. Probably is a place.
Anyways, and then of Aberfoyle pursued his interests in the people of peace, as they called them. And he wrote it down. It's called The Secret Commonwealth of Elves, Fauns, and Fairies. Oh, this is the book that I bought off of Amazon. He really published it, and I bought it. And this is the one when I was like, wait, what? Because I went to buy it off of Amazon. I'm like, I already bought this book in like 2017. Ooh. And it gave me like the chills because I was like, it was like deja vu of like, I've already been here and done this.
You've been in a time slip. It
was so crazy. So yes, I bought this, but it's a rare insight and tradition drawn from a range of oral informants, local history, and personal experience. So he He was born in Aberfoyle in 1644. Kirk was his father's 7th son and was thus assumed to have the power of the second sight. See, this is what I'm talking about. Like, he himself was like a superstitious, like, Scotsman.
So and then he wrote it down because he was interested, not because he was someone that wanted to, like,
no, he was interested, but he
opinion.
Exactly. So he says it might be. Oh, he studied theology though, and was Christian theology, and was an accomplished Gaelic scholar. He was also the first person writing in English or Scots to use the expression fairy tale. How cool is that?
Oh, that's amazing.
It might seem odd to find a man of the church arguing for the existence of fairies, but Kirk was not unique. Around the same time, other scholars in Scotland and England strove against the rise of atheism and materialism. For men like, and then he lists a bunch of people, incredulity about the supernatural world equated with doubt into the existence of God. So Kirk maintained that fairy belief was not inconsistent with Christianity. All of our Christians, listen up. And his intention in recording evidence of fairies was in part to uphold beliefs in angels, the devils, and the Holy Spirit. That's fascinating. And that goes right along the lines with, like, how Walter was saying, like, all religions believe in, spirits of some kind. And the Celtic,
we just have different names.
Have different names for them. So he was like, hey, look, the fairies are real. And that's how God is real. Which makes, like,
and isn't it interesting though that that fairy belief and fairy tales have become something else. They're not considered that at all anymore. No. They're considered fanciful things of people who aren't quite in their right mind. Or ask my son would like to say it's this sort of strange, stupid belief of people who were too stupid back then, who didn't really understand how science and how the world worked. Although you wouldn't dare say that about people who nowadays who followed other religions. You wouldn't say, oh, you just do that because you don't understand how the world works. But somehow with fairy belief, it's seen as being...
But that's our culture imposing that point of view. That doesn't change the fact. That's why I love anthropology so much, because your first job as an anthropologist is to rid yourself of your own culture and all those biases. Like, shed them. You can't do your job as an anthropologist until you let go of those beliefs. And then you assume, like, you are all in to what you're learning, whatever that may be. And then you, like, step back and look at it all objectively. And that's why it's so eye-opening. And that's why I love this book, is because he recognized that today is the same back then. It wasn't like cool or couth or normal to be talking about fairies. And he had to go into these extreme regions. And he actually goes into the book too, quite at length, saying, how can we take our word about the fairy faith from a bunch of scholars who live in the city, like, who've never seen one, who've never experienced them? Like, these guys don't know anything. He's like, I'm going to go talk to the people that are seeing things, that live in the countryside. And he even compares like city dwellers versus country dwellers, and how detached people who live in the cities and who, like, it was just so funny. I was talking about, like, the rat race, and I'm like, is he living in our time period? Like, it sounded like he was talking about
the rat race of 1911. My rat race is so 1911.
It, like, really was wigging me out.
I just don't know if I can cope with the fast-paced rat race of 1911.
I know. Listen to this. I highlighted it. It says, are city dwellers like these? And he calls them nature's unnatural children, which I thought was so cool.
Oh, I love that. Like, I'm going to say that. That's going to be a new phrase for me.
Nature's unnatural children who grind out their lives in an unceasing struggle for wealth and power, social position, and even for bread, fit to judge nature's natural children who believe in fairies. Are they right in not believing in an invisible world which they cannot conceive, which, if it does exist, they, even though they can be scientists, blah, 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 blah. Like, they're like, how can they even be the ones talking about this and judging this when they're, like, so far removed? And I'm like, it's such a good point. I'm like, you're so right. So yeah, it was just like, it's like, or is the country dwelling the sometimes unpractical and unsuccessful, the dreaming and the uncivilized peasants, right? These questions ought to rise in the minds of anthropologists, very serious reflection worldwide in its scope. And I was like, yeah, you go, Walter. I'm on your side, buddy. Except for that
when
one
did
comment.
Walter die?
1965.
Oh, really?
He was born in 1878.
Oh my goodness.
I know, isn't that so cool?
Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to wrap this up.
So are you going to wrap this up by telling me whether they actually exist or not? Come on.
I am. I'm going to tell you the answers.
The answer to life and the universe and everything. Yes. I am ready. And I am.
He does amble his way there. It's not a direct line because he still has so many things to discuss after he collects his testimonial, like things he explores everything from like dream states to like mediums who claim to talk to things, like drug induced states. He really flips over like every kind of coin and looks at it from all angles, scientific angles, to really, I just can't, I don't want to oversimplify us because he really includes so much. He talks about animism, which is basically the belief that objects, places, and creatures all have like a distinct spiritual presence. And then that definitely is part of this, but not all of it. But that's where also he talks about, that's kind of where this ancient Celtic belief probably started from, which is very similar to like the Native Americans and a lot of cultures who associate, Asian cultures especially as well, who associate a place with, a place or an object or a creature, real or, fanciful, all having like their own souls or their own presence kind of thing. So that's kind of where it started from the ancient beliefs.
I'm still a little confused though, because there is a difference to me in my mind about, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a difference in my mind between, for example, the indigenous people in Australia with their dream time, or the Native American beliefs with various different deities or gods, or even Christianity with gods and angels, in that there are not, and fairies, because in all of those beliefs, there might be a very, very, very minute number of, I saw an angel flying overhead, or I saw this miracle that appeared, or whatever, with actual tangible experiences. Right. So most of those are a belief that is within the person or the society or the group of people, and they believe it, and they go and they worship this thing somehow, but they don't actually see anything. Right. And then there's fairies, which are seen
all the time. I know, that's the same roadblock that I can't get over.
And that is a big block for me, in that trying to even anthropologically, and I'm amazed I said that word, even to anthropologically explain the two as being similar, right, is a little bit of a stumbling block for me, because if they are seen by people in loads of different countries, I want to know where they came from, or where they exist in terms of art. Do they actually exist in the forest and we just don't see them very often? The one question I do have is, when you see them wearing clothes, like, where do they make their clothes? Have they got little sewing machines, or do their clothes, they don't have fairy shops, so how do they make their wool out of the,
where
I just
did
want
they
to
come
know
from?
all of that.
I know, I do too.
Because it's not all in imagination, they are actually seen. So where do they live? Do they pop in and out of another dimension? My gut feeling is that there's another dimension that they pop in and out of.
Okay, so this is what I was screaming at Sean with over sushi.
Oh my God, I'm so jealous that you went out for sushi.
I know. It was
oh
good,
my
but
God, Karen, that's my favorite. You just made me so jealous.
I am really sorry. It was delicious.
What did you have?
We had 4 super crazy rolls that like we go to this one sushi restaurant that has like they have rolls called like sexy girls, and like,
oh my God,
they have like they must have like 40 rolls, and they're all different, and they all have insane names that make no sense whatsoever. So we had
Did you have prawn tempura?
No, we had straight up sushi.
Oh, I love prawn tempura. No, right. Okay. Sorry. I'm going off.
No, I'm sorry. No, it's okay. It's been a really long time to be in lockdown. I totally get it.
I'm like slabbering here. Really slabbering.
So he actually they actually sum that up after plotting through a lot of reasons why and why not from different schools of thought and a lot of scientific bents, as you can in 1911. And they have way more than you think, by the way. So there's a few different sentences that actually are going to touch on all the things that you just touched on, which was, sorry, it's really fascinating. And I basically like highlighted an entire page and was just like, fuck it, just see page 173 because it's all there. But they're basically, this one guy sums it up. I think Walter's like and it's a little bit, I'll expound upon this a tiny bit, which is basically they were like, okay, what it boils down to is that there exists in nature, in a myriad activity, like a psychic element, the essential nature of which is still hidden from us. So in a sense, there is shit out there for sure. And we cannot have access to it all the time. Like this is true. Like there is something out there. And that's where but he talks about that way more scientifically than I am boiling it down to you for up here.
Is that a little bit like when people take certain drugs and they see things differently? So because it opens up parts of your brain that are normally dormant.
Well, they do talk about that, but and I noticed the same thing. She talks about that in episode, I think 14 of her podcast, of that same podcast. And they're basically saying, no, it's not the same. Like a drug-induced crazy state is a drug-induced crazy state. And that's different. Like this is like reality.
But and what I mean is that when you take certain drugs.
All right. But we can't go down this tangent because they're talking sober, like real life. I know what you're talking about, but I don't want to get too far off.
You're not getting my point. And I'm just going to, because what I mean is that it is proven through that. So I'm not saying take drugs to see fairies. I'm not saying that at all.
No, I know.
I'm saying that it's proven through how your brain, there's parts of your brain that only work when you're on certain drugs, that we at all times are not using all of our brains that we could be, which means which is exactly what you said, where there are parts of the natural world that are not tangibly available to us.
Right.
So us as humans, we are not able to see every sight that's out there or smell every smell that's out there. We would be, I think we'd go crazy. We would be too bombarded with stimulus.
Mm-hmm.
And so our brain naturally closes lots of stuff off for us.
Right.
And so that's maybe why we can't always see this other part of nature that is there that we just can't see. That's what I meant. Like not taking drugs to see it, but like that just as a human being, like as a creature, we see differently than cats see or insects see. If you look at those videos or whatever, where it shows you what the world looks like to an insect,
mm-hmm.
and it looks completely different. But I think we are so egotistical as a race that we assume that what we see is what we see is there.
Right.
And we never question it. We never question that actually what I see as the color green might be completely different from what you see as the color green.
Yeah.
or that there might be another shade of green that exists that nobody in the world can see.
Oh my God. I used to like keep myself up at night thinking about these exact same things.
I think about these things.
And the reason I'm going to say no is because...
You mean after that you still say no?
Yes, because you're like presuming that it's within the human's like physical body. It like the drugs are changing what we're seeing physically, like you know, like we're picking up on new things because of this drug, but it has nothing to do with the human side. It's actually everything to do with these entities on the outside. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So like and because he talks that after they say that, saying like there's shit out there that exists that is hidden from us. And he expounds a little bit about like the differences between spirits and fairies, which is always interchangeable. And I do sometimes even on the podcast, I'm like, why are we talking about ghosts? This is like a fairy podcast. And I'm like, there is something because they're spirit. I mean, they're both kind of have this spirit element, and they both can be seen sometimes and not seen other times, but you know, they're there. Sometimes you can hear them without seeing them. Sometimes you see them without hearing them. You know what I mean? So they do have a lot of these slippery similarities. So on page 173, he talks about the final testing of the X quantity. And I believe the X quantity is like this other entity. It gets real crazy out there. He actually talks about the fourth dimension, which is actually really fucked up too, because Sean and I just this weekend watched a movie that was all about, and I need to find the title of it. He told me before I was going up, but I didn't hear what he said, but it was all about the fourth dimension. It was about these kids. It's like just came out. It was like kids that are basically stuck in Groundhog Day, like waking up and it's the same day over and over and over and over again. They're these two teenagers. And then they realize they're going through it together when everyone else is like living their lives. And so they're either like everyone else is asleep and we're awake, or we're asleep and everyone else is awake. And they were like trying to figure it out, but they broke through it by finding the fourth dimension. And then I'm literally reading in this book from 1911 about the fourth dimension, like 2 days later. And I was like,
that's so spooky.
My mind is like bending right now. I can't handle it. So, but it all is wrapped up in here. But there's basically saying like, we have seemed to arrived at a point in our long investigations after 3 years of collecting all this stuff and doing all this scientific experimentation that we can postulate scientifically on showing the data of psychical research, as he calls it, the existence of such invisible intelligences as gods, genie, demons, and all kinds of true fairies and disembodied men, i.e. ghosts. It is not necessary to produce here, in addition to what already has been set forth, the very voluminous, detailed evidence of psychical research as to the existence of such intelligences. The general statement may be made that there are hundreds of carefully proven cases of phenomenon or apparitions, precisely like many of those which the Celtic peoples attribute to fairies. So they're like, ghosts are fucking real, is what they're saying. And then he goes on and on. And then they make a really funny comparison of like why would ghosts be like messing with us? You know how ghosts tend to like mess with us. Excuse me. So say like this one guy said, the greater part of the phenomena observed from ghosts, noises, movements of tables, confusions, disturbances, raps, are really childless, vulgar, often ridiculous, and rather resemble the pranks of mischievous boys than serious bona fide actions. Is it possible not to notice this? Why should the souls of the dead amuse themselves in this way? I'm like, it's such a good question. It was like, this supposition seems almost absurd. And then it says there could be no better description of the pranks which house haunting fairies like brownies and elementals enjoy than this. And to suppose that the dead perform such mischievous and playful acts is, in truth, absurd. So this is like their reasoning why fairies are real and different than ghosts. It says two inescapable hypotheses present themselves. Either it is we who reproduce these phenomenon, like boys playing tricks on us, or it's the spirits themselves. But mark this well. These spirits are not necessarily the souls of the dead, for other kinds of spiritual beings may exist, and space may be full of them without our ever knowing anything about it, except under unusual circumstances.
No, that's just freaked me out big time.
It says, do we not find in the different ancient literatures demons, angels, gnomes, goblins, sprites, specters, elementals, etc.? Perhaps these legends are not without some foundation, in fact. Like, they're everywhere throughout history, throughout all culture.
So what he's saying is that some ghost experiences might not be from actual dead people ghosts. They might be from fairies.
Yes, or something else.
I just got so freaked out by that.
I know.
Oh, that freaked me out so bad. You really expect me to go to sleep tonight?
I know. And then he follows up with a story from a woman. This is great. It says, and then he just, it's just so good. All right, I have to tell you this one story.
You're expecting me to move on from that revelation.
No, I'm going to go quickly. Deeper and even figure out
meanwhile, I am sitting here. I'm sitting here imagining there's things sitting behind me.
But only because there are.
I'm scared to look in the monitor in case something pops up.
Well, now
I got a curtain behind me, so there could be something lurking at the other side that I can't even see.
Yeah.
Quickly tell me a nice fairy story, Karen, not a nasty
here we go.
Fairy story.
All right. When I was a little girl, this is from Mrs. Margaret Quinn. I lived with my mother in Westmeath, near Mullingar. A fort was at the back of the house, and our mother used to hear music playing around our house all night. She said she has seen them, the good people. It often happened here at home that we would have clothes out on the line, and they would float off like a balloon at a time when there would be no wind. Or wind in the daylight. My mother would come out and say, God bless them, the good people. They will bring them back. And then the clothes would slowly come floating back to the line. And then in another chapter, there's a testimony concerning objects moving without contact with human beings, either through the agency of fairies or of the dead. And then says, after due investigation of such and various other phenomena, Sir William Crookes, among other theories to explain, gives this theory. The actions of a separate order of beings living on this earth, but invisible and immaterial to us, able, however, occasionally to manifest their presence, known in almost all countries and ages as demons, not necessarily bad, gnomes, fairies, elves, goblins, etc. Here we seem to have what ought to be, by this stage of our study, proof of the psychological theory of the nature and origin of the fairy faith. Right?
Oh my goodness.
So, yeah.
So is he saying that it's like almost like a parallel world within our world that we can't see?
Yes.
And occasionally it slips through.
Or, yes. And I need to go back and reread. I had to skim to make it in time for the I was literally reading like to the millisecond before repress play. I was like, wait, I'm not quite done. Yeah, I'm gonna reread this. That's why I was like, I think this can be like a two-parter, because there is I mean, he talks about like having genuine hallucinations. I mean, he digs into all of this, like using mediums, but then he basically boils it down like the background of all religious and mystical beliefs being animistic, just the whole sense of like souls, and like them has grown up in ancient times out of definite like psychical phenomena, identical in character with now those studied by science, and is kept alive by an unbroken succession of seers. We have a clear right to set up under scientific authority these tentative conclusions. 1, fairyland exists as a supernormal state of consciousness into which men and women may enter temporarily in dreams, trances, or in various ecstatic conditions for an infinite period at death. Because that was another thing too, is that people were saying like, this is where like the Christianity and the fairy faith kind of were flip-flopping, because that they were thinking that like, is fairyland just another, alternative to heaven? Basically, it's like off they go, they went to fairyland. We see this all the time in the stories as well.
And actually all those stories of of time disappearing, which I'm going to touch on in my topic next week, because I want to speak about fairy rings. And if there's another world that is sort of almost like parallel to our world, it conceivably could be that time moves differently there.
Yeah, he writes about that, the time.
So it's 1 year could be 100 years there.
Right.
Or the other way around.
And there's so many accounts of people going to fairyland, and they're different.
I need to research them all.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Episode. But there's been some talk through science lately about how they believe, scientists, I'm saying scientists because I don't know any particular names of any, I'm being very vague here, sorry, but they're now starting to come to the conclusion that it could actually be true that there are multiple universes, and that when you die, you like shift into another one. Like your energy just shifts into another. So what people perceived as heaven, or these near-death experiences where they went somewhere else,
right?
It's like another evidence, it's actually just another multiple in this multiverse of
the fourth dimension.
Yes,
I love I'm so open to all of it, because like we don't know,
fascinating,
and that's why I love talking about it and like researching old theories and new theories. And like I think it's fascinating, because the fact of the matter is we don't know.
There could be another dimension where the people are only 2 feet tall, and my question over where if they live in the forest across the river from me, and they appear to me in a little green woven jacket, and I'm thinking they haven't got a sewing machine in that forest, that they could have one in their own. I know I'm making light of this and I'm making fun of it, but
I am thinking
like they could have one in their own dimension,
right?
Their own dimension that we don't actually get to.
Why not? And like you said,
humans getting hung up on practicalities. I always want to know where toilets are, and I always want to know.
I'm with you, sister. Don't even worry about it.
Somebody makes their shoes, or somebody,
Well, what like you said earlier, humans are like insanely egotistical, and they think that they know everything. We don't know jack shit.
We don't know.
What do we know about the universe? Like, I'm very little, like you know what I mean? As much as we know nothing still. Like, it's really, so I just love listening and hearing and learning. My mind is just wide open all the time. Like I'm not staking my stance ever, because I'm there. The possibilities are so endless right now. And that's why it's so fascinating. I'm not like saying yes to this, no to that. I'm just saying like, sure. And that's also what I learned about studying anthropology in college, was that's where I had this huge shift, which was exactly this. It was like, oh my God, that Yanomami in the middle of the Brazilian rainforest could be the right one. He could know everything. And we don't even realize that guy has all the answers. Like, he's right. And guess what? Nobody ever listens to him. Well, he just thinks like, who do you know who's right? Like,
throughout the world, there are, even if you took the present time, so if you took the present day and went throughout the world, there are so many different beliefs all over that vary so much. And then if you add on to that throughout time, so the way that we perceived the world 100 years ago was completely different 100 years before that, 1,000 years before that.
Of course.
Actually, I remember seeing on, I think it was an episode of QI or something, which is hosted by Stephen Fry, that within medicine, just within medicine, things are disproved so quickly that what is seen to be the gospel truth of what things are changes just at this hugely quick rate.
God, I want to know.
And it's what we believe, what people believed would cure you for certain things 50 years ago, we now go, oh my God, how could they be so stupid? So why is
and
it?
That's a tiny.
That's like a tiny part of history. So it's so conceited of us to think.
I agree
that what we believe as being truth and the truth and the right way, in 50 years time, the people in 50 years time are going to be like, how could they have done that? And how could they have believed that? That is just so stupid. And then when you put that into perspective and you realize that if you'd lived 2,000 years ago or 100 years ago, that your belief system in the world and the universe would be so completely different to the way that it is now, it makes you realize that maybe the way that you believe isn't the right way.
Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah. And we don't know.
We don't know anything. And that's why I refuse.
Will we ever find out? I have no idea. Do we get like a revelation when we die? Maybe not. Maybe we end up in an alternative universe and go, how the fuck did I get here?
I know. Well, that's what I mean.
And then not remember it anyway.
Well, that's why I'm never like, I believe one thing over another, because I'm like, I don't know. So how the heck can I say? And I
wouldn't mind ending up in fairyland though, as long as they were.
It's a good music rocking, and you don't really get old, and you don't get fat because you don't really need to like eat.
And you get to wear super cute like medieval style clothes.
And there's bagpipe music. I'm in.
I'm in
all day long.
Let's go there.
Let's go. And that's why I could like spend my days reading about this, because I'm like, well, why not? Like you don't know that that's not true as much as it's just like I'm open to all of it. And I do have to say, on one last thing I'm going to say about my friend Walter here is that he does.
I want to be friends with Walter as well. Can I be friends with Walter too?
He does do a really good job of being really fair and being like, so much of this is because there's so much that we don't know yet. Like he says it flat out in the book. He doesn't say like, this is my theory and they're real, period, the end. He is fully aware that there's so much that science doesn't know. Like he's such a good balanced like view on it, that he's like, we do think that there are physical manifestations of spirits. Like there is something there that is proven, but the greater, kind of why they're there is, and, there's still questions that are very much unanswered with their scientific advancements of 1911. So that is my summation of that eye-opening book. I want to reread it like 6 more times.
What's the name of it again? Just for our listeners.
The Fairy Faith in Celtic Countries
by
Walter Evans-Wenz. I know, it's just really fascinating. And again, you can read it just for the testimonies, because why too? They're short and very clearly written. He was like, I want everyone to be able to like super well understand what they are.
So you could like dip in and out of those when you've got a spare.
And he touches on absolutely everything you could ever imagine. We could do like years podcasts on every story.
That's good. We'll never run out of things to say.
I know.
That was fascinating.
Oh, good. I thought it was so interesting. And I do want to talk about time slips. And I'm going to have Sean on. Sean's my husband. I want to have him on so we can have our good fight. We both are like, not seeing what I'm saying. And he's like, you are not at all seeing what I'm saying. Oh my God.
Am I going to be the gooseberry in that episode? Either the gooseberry getting in the middle where I'm not wanted, or I'll end up being the mediator in the middle of the
You'll
fight.
Be siding with me the whole time. So
I will. I will.
It'll be awesome.
I will.
It'll be too
Let's bully Sean.
Yes. It'll be so fun. We're so opposite too. It's hilarious. So I think that's what I'm going to cover next. There's a little tiny thing of this in there that I want to actually make sure I don't miss. What are you doing, my friend?
Me?
Yeah.
I wasn't sure if you were talking to me or Maggie there.
My dead dog in the background. She's dead.
I haven't started researching yet, but I want to talk about fairy rings. And I might even talk about fairy mounds as well. I'm gonna see if I have enough just on fairy rings. We could leave fairy mounds to a whole other episode, but I just want to speak about those magical places and what they mean and what happens there, and maybe some accounts of first-hand accounts of people that have experienced them.
Yes, that would be amazing. That's a very popular issue too. So maybe more than 6 people will listen.
I hope so.
but I doubt it. And at the end of the day, I don't really care. Because I could talk about this like morning, noon, and night.
I know, me too.
I'm trying
obsessed.
to think. I know. It's really bad. I have to sometimes like force myself to pull out because I was screaming about fairies at a sushi restaurant. Like, but they're real.
I wish I'd seen that. That would have been so funny.
I'm like, people are actually seeing them. So you can't even tell me like that it's not real. They're seeing them. Like, it doesn't get any more real than that. Like,
Sean was probably sitting there thinking, oh my God, this
he's
is
like,
my
but
wife.
I don't believe. I'm like, it doesn't matter if you believe or not. They're looking right at them. Like, we were just like going back and forth and back and forth. Oh my God. I need Lucy here to back me up.
I would have totally backed you up.
If you see a Mack truck like on the highway, are you like, you don't believe me that there's a Mack truck? You're looking at it like there's like a 3D dimensional thing right there. Like, I can understand debating the beliefs of a spirit or something that you're just like an idea that you're bouncing, but not something that like more than one person is literally looking at. I don't understand how you can tell me that it's not there. It drives me nuts.
What did he have to say to that? Shall we leave that for that episode?
Yeah, I was drinking, so I don't remember that.
It's going to be you to you as well.
So yeah, so he was like, it's just, I don't believe it. I'm like, I just don't understand. Still, yeah, that'll be a fun conversation to have online. Well, that should wrap it up because we're coming
over 2 hours
upon our, not quite, but we will if we don't stop. So thank you guys for listening. If you have your own crazy stories, anything fairy related or ghost,
we would love to hear
from you. So please go to our website and fill out our contact us form and let us know. It's onescottonot.com. We want to hear from you. And that's it. Ready? Don't fuck with fairies.
And be good to ghosts.
Bye.
Oh, we're gonna have to think of a better one than that.
Oh, that's so good. Stop it. All right, we'll see you guys next week.